What is education, and why is education important? Is it important? After all, what's the real purpose of getting educated about anything? We so frequently take education and the process for learning in general totally for granted. Not only that, but the ways in which we think. How we've gone about structuring our own consciousness itself has largely remained unchanged for a long, long time. So how do we literally change our minds? Can we reconfigure our own ways of thinking? And if so, how? Join Dr. Joseph Atman, the founder of one of the world's most revolutionary educational centers, Middletree, and award-winning broadcaster Tammy Trujillo for Educate Everyone and explore the mysteries of our own consciousness and the education we implement in order for it to be what it is.
And our guest on this episode of Educate Everyone is Dr. Sherylle J. She's a developmental psychologist, leadership educator, and coach with over 20 years of experience in higher education, research, and nonprofit consulting. She serves as director of internships and research at the Kravis Leadership Institute at Claremont McKenna College, where her work focuses on leadership education, women's leadership, and work-family issues. Dr. Tan has co-edited several books, including Women in Leadership, Journey Toward Equity, which received the 2022 TAA Most Promising Textbook Award. She also offers coaching, workshops, and yoga-based wellness programs through her personal platform, helping individuals lead with purpose and balance.
So we're welcoming in Sherylle J, who's got a background in psychology. I have a background in philosophy, not exactly the same thing, but there's some overlap there. So Sherylle, what got you into psych?
I've always been interested in psychology. Actually, I remember taking a psychology course in high school and thought it was really fascinating. And so I thought, well, why don't I take some psych courses? I went to UC Irvine for my undergrad and started taking some psychology courses. I really enjoyed courses on cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, and just kept on through that with my undergraduate work, and actually got to do some research with some faculty at UC Irvine in a infant cognition lab, which was really fascinating to learn about infants and how they learn. And that got me to think, why don't I keep on with my education, and went on to Claremont Graduate University and got my degree in applied developmental psychology at CGU.
Have you done more work with infant cognition?
No.
Okay.
That's what catapulted me.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, they are built to learn, right? They are built to develop and grow and to be sponges with the world. The way you assess, or at least from what I learned back in undergrad, how they might understand the world. Some of the ways are through their rate of sucking, like sucking a pacifier, their eye movements and which direction they're looking. So researchers who work with infants have very unique ways of determining what they are paying attention to and observing infancy. In grad school, I did research with preschoolers. We were looking at the temperament of children and the impact parenting styles might have on those temperament and personality factors. So that was really interesting. And that was one of the main projects that I worked in, the main lab that I worked at through graduate school, and then went on to work in children's mental health and did evaluation at a children's mental health clinic. And then that led me to Claremont McKenna. When I started at Claremont McKenna, I was working for a research institute that focused on work, family, and children. And since my background was really on parenting, a lot of the research that I was doing there was on maternal employment and the impact of maternal employment. And then that led me over to Kravis Leadership Institute. And people are like, well, where are the linkages with development there? But leadership is about development and is a lifelong developmental journey. And there's a lot of connects back to what I used to do with regards to parenting and maternal employment. And my particular area of interest is on women in leadership and those kind of topics. But leadership develop in particular in developing undergraduates and teaching them and learning about how to become the best leader that they can be. That's what I'm most interested and passionate about. I would say that I'm a scholar educator more so than anything. I am a certified leadership coach, so I do coach and have some clients that I coach. Primarily, my coaching has focused with undergraduate students. That's really my purpose, is their development, their education, their growth in their leadership. I teach courses on leadership, so foundation of leadership, women in leadership, and created some developmental initiatives here at the Kravis Leadership Institute, which we focus on serving the CMC population and community, since we are a research institute at CMC. And so that's where my focus has really been, that leadership, the social psychology and developmental piece that are connected there.
Kravis is kind of an interesting center. I'm a CGU guy. A lot of people don't know about Claremont McKenna's general sort of persona and its identity and the kind of students that are drawn there. And so Kravis obviously has a very unique kind of niche within that sort of mission, that overall mission that Claremont McKenna has.
One of our mottos is leadership in the making. We're really focused on developing leaders. And that's a big focus in the college. We have a lot of students who are interested in economics, finance, government, different professions. And so the connection to leadership is very strong in those particular areas. And so the Kravis Leadership Institute, we're one of, I believe, 11 research institutes at Claremont McKenna College. And our focus obviously is on leadership. We focus on leadership research, but we also focus on leadership development. And so preparing students to develop their leadership skills, abilities, and knowledge so that they can take that as they move forward out into the world. And so in addition to doing scholarly research, we have initiatives that support Claremont McKenna students in developing their leadership. One in particular that I'm most proud of is the Women in Leadership Development Initiative. That is something that I implemented, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago now. It's a year-long initiative. So one of the things that's important to realize is leadership doesn't develop at one little event, one workshop, one retreat. It's really a lifelong process, right? Learning about leadership, developing your leadership, that happens over time. And so you could go through one workshop and you can't say, oh, I'm a leader and I know everything I need to know. That workshop should help you start to develop and continue thinking about what else you need to think about and work on. And so this Women in Leadership Development Initiative is a year-long initiative where we have a cohort of students who identify as women participate in a retreat, 4 workshops, leadership coaching. So they get one-on-one coaching with a certified leadership coach. And then they also get a support system through their cohort, and then a smaller group of peers that they get to meet with on a regular basis throughout the year to support them. So it's really about these 3 pathways of leadership that they develop throughout the course of the year through leadership training, leadership coaching, and leadership support. Because leadership doesn't happen in a vacuum. We really believe that it has to occur over time. And as you create these foundational educational pieces, students can take that and think about what their goals are, work with a coach, create these leadership experiments. Maybe it's happens in the classroom, maybe it happens in the club, for them to practice those leadership skills that they really want to work and develop. And so they're able to do that over the course of a year. And so that's one of the programs that I'm most proud of. We also offer leadership to the entire campus. They can apply. We have an application process, and they get to meet with these coaches. They are certified professional coaches who not only work with our undergraduate students, but often work with CEOs, executives, and they love working with the undergraduate students because it's a breath of fresh air for them. They have different type of leadership needs because of where they're at and what they are hoping to strive for. So it's really fascinating working with undergrads and developing their leadership. And so that's something that has been very fulfilling for me.
Yeah, I can imagine because, again, the Claremont McKenna population, for those folks who don't know, it's a lot of people who, as you sort of mentioned, are interested in business. They're interested in politics or economics, or these are a lot of folks who in 10 years are going to be your boss. Basically, right? These are folks who generally out there to be impactful in a very high way in the future. And
absolutely,
people don't know about the Claremont colleges in general, I should say. And Claremont McKenna is Peter Drucker and a number of other really influential people had a big hand in making it what it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So then, Sherylle, what makes for a good leader?
That's a hard question. That really depends on what you define as good, right? We all have different ideas of what leadership means. And when I work with students, I never try to define leadership for them. I really want them to figure that out on their own. And what I do is present a lot of ideas, a lot of theories, a lot of profiles and examples of leadership. But ultimately, what is most effective and what they believe might be good leadership may differ from person to person. There are a lot of skills that come up over and over again over the years that I've taught. And the most important ones, I think, especially among undergraduate students, when I ask them what is most important to know or be or exude as a leader, one of them is empathy. Empathy has come up time and time again. Of course, being a great communicator, a great listener. And so I think those are some of the things, those interpersonal skills, those interpersonal relationship related behaviors seems to be what really resonates with other people as those leaders who are most effective or who are, quote, good. So whatever you mean by good, because that can mean a lot of different things and it can mean different things to different people. And so it all depends on your perspective and where you're coming from and the context, whether it be a corporate or social sector, a nonprofit. Leadership can be different in different settings. But I think ultimately that relationship, empathy, communication, interpersonal skills, those tend to be the most common things that many people believe are important for leadership.
Through your work, have you done anything clinically or in any other capacity, research-based, that supports that? And as a leader myself in our organization, I think empathy is really, really important to try and understand other folks' positions. But then, I mean, you also have to be very decisive. At some point, you have to make a decision. Ultimately, that's kind of what it boils down to. So, yeah, while I hear what you're saying about what do you mean by good, and as a philosopher, I'm always trying to define our terms anytime we talk about something. But I mean, at some point, a leader is there to do a thing. And whether it's lead the country, make the organization successful, make the classroom understand what the lesson is, at some point, a leader is there to obtain an objective.
Right.
So is good leadership just trying to get people to understand what the objective is and go along with it? Because, and again, I know this from personal experience, you can listen to everyone in the room. At some point, it's your decision. As a leader, you have to hear everybody at some point, and this is where leadership gets real, real difficult. You know, the decision you make, there's going to be, you know, a handful of folks that aren't happy with it. But at some point, a decision has to be made.
True, absolutely. And that's a type of leadership, right? There's so many different types of leadership out there. Yeah, a decision needs to be made. It can be made in a democratic manner. It can be made in an autocratic manner, or you can delegate those decisions. So it all depends on the style of leadership. It also depends on the context and what is going on. So that might differ. So there are different kinds of theoretical approaches to leadership, like situational leadership, adaptive leadership, that may depend on a number of different factors. Yeah, we are all working towards a goal, but how the leader gets to that goal may differ depending on what is necessary. If you're in an emergency room, for example, you're not going to have time to get everyone's opinion on what needs to be done. You just got to get in, take care of business, and save a life. Whereas in a different context, right, there may be other scenarios where, well, let's work at this as a group. We have more heads coming up with ideas. We create more innovative opportunities for a new product, a new way of doing something that goes beyond the normal way that might be inefficient or may create more creativity. So it really depends on the setting in terms of what type of leadership is needed and what can be good, because every setting will be different. And then it also depends on the followers and the team. Followership is just as important as leadership. If you have great followers and individuals who are motivated, and as a leader, you empower them and motivate them in a way that helps them to be these star followers, then the product, the goal, is done in the most creative and efficient way. And sometimes a leader can step back just a tad and allow the work to happen. So good leadership is like a lot of different factors. So it really is context specific, right? Leadership happens in a system. You can't have leadership without a leader, the followers, and the context. And depending on all those three things, a different type of leadership can work for one type of combination, and it may not work for the other combination. So really depends.
It's a great point, because you have to be really adaptable, I think, as a leader, because just like you said, circumstances change, your team changes, your objectives change.
Yes.
I think maybe another important quality is just being open and receptive to change and to trying to see the full big picture. And about at some point you have to make a decision, but I don't think you can be married to that decision all the time. You just have to be open to that adaptability and that the evolution of whatever it is that is transpiring within the circumstance, whether that circumstance, again, is you're leading some part of or branch of government or just even the head of the household. And how do those various traits kind of translate between leaders, would you say? Like, are there similarities between what makes good leaders at lower levels, just, again, being the head of a household or being the small company business owner, and like being the president of a Fortune 500 company or a governor or something at a much higher and larger level?
I think it comes back to some of those behaviors that we've talked about: empathy, being relational, interpersonal. Because even if you're this, big CEO or in politics, people will follow you if you are this type of person that they want to follow. That matters.
It's that charismatic
you can't be
leadership, right?
Well, not necessarily just charismatic, but if you have empathy, you're caring, you care about people, right? You can't be a leader if you don't have people who want to follow you, because you have to have followers in a certain context. So that's just important. So those interpersonal skills, those quote unquote soft skills, can be very, very important for leaders in leadership. Because if you want to influence people, if you want people to be empowered to work towards a goal that you need to meet, well, how are you going to do that? I mean, you could do it in a way that is command and control and just you do this, and you do that. It may still get done, but will they love doing the work? Will it be the best work? It may not. You never know. They may just be going through the motions, whereas you want something creative. You might need to act in a different way. So again, it depends on that context, that situation, and what your goals as a leader are. If your goals are just get the work done, maybe that autocratic approach is all you need. If it's to come up with the most creative and innovative and effective and efficient way to get at a problem, well, maybe this autocratic style is not the best way to go about that. So it depends on those goals. So I know it doesn't really say, okay, these are what you have to have, but I think it really just depends. It depends on the situation. It depends on who are following the leader, because ultimately leadership is a social construct and it happens between people. People are relational. People want something. There's a give and take that happens. We're all human. So there's a humanness to leadership.
Can you say more about that as a social construct? Because while I hear that, there also certainly like leaders that take place in the animal kingdom. It's still a social happening that,
Right.
you've got the leader of the pack, or you've got that lead organism within the garden that kind of nourishes, other things. And that, there's been, studies about how trees feed one another and communicate. And so it's different of that reciprocating sort of communication that is sometimes started by one single individual that, again, in a social relationship, whether that's a human thing or not, then others follow.
Well, I think in leadership, there's a social relationship in terms of people granting people the power to lead or claiming that power to lead, right? So you're not a leader if you have no one to lead. You have to have some followers. So I think that's where that social construct happens. Do certain people grant an individual power, whatever it is? Sometimes it's because they have the title, right? Or sometimes it's these informal leaders who people grant their respect and their attention to. And so they come up as leaders even though they may not have the title of leader. So there's a myriad of ways in which leadership is very social in that respect, because people will allow or follow certain people for whatever reasons, good or bad, just depends on what that is. I don't know much about the animal kingdom, so I don't proclaim to be any kind of expert, but when animal is granted by the other animals leadership, either because they are more physically stronger, because they
Sure.
can get more of the food, or whatever that, depending on the type of, if they're foraging or whatever, maybe those are the criteria for which leadership and power is provided in that particular setting, but there's something there. So even I think amongst people, there's something that happens in terms of where people will grant leadership to those who either they respect or they think is an expert or has some kind of power, because there's different types of power. There's these social bases of power, expert power, and it doesn't always necessitate that someone have a title.
I think what we're kind of driving at here as we're talking about it is that leadership, although it might be a social construction, there's something inherent in the hierarchical structure of being and phenomena that at some point there has to be a catalyst, an impetus, a decision made, a lead, a way that is provided by something or someone or some kind of being that then has all the other followers, as you've described them, socially or otherwise, that goes along and literally takes that lead of that thing. Because while we've made it a human construction in leadership, I wonder if there isn't something deeper going on there within, again, just the way that things are, that there needs to be something that happens and then people or any kinds of beings pursue that catalyst event. And then there are other events or other happenings that of course are offshore that need their own kind of leadership or need their own kind of ways to follow. So I'm wondering if there's not something that's just kind of baked into the nature of the way that things are that calls for leadership to a certain degree or calls all of us to sort of follow a calling or something that is something of a guiding light. Because when you said it's a social construction, well, yeah, but there's also something like inherent in the way that everything is.
You do find in leaderless groups, class projects or whatnot, oftentimes someone will come up and
somebody takes up the mantle,
take
right?
the lead, right?
Yep.
You sit around until someone says, okay, well, we got to do something about this, right? So.
Right. This is going to be a terrible example, and I do this all the time because I don't have this kind of mind that has the good detailed memory, but I read somewhere not too long ago that there was a number of different studies that were done about totally socially equal happenings or like groups where there were no leaders, that everybody was made to be equal, and that was how, like everybody had exactly equal say in the project or whatever it was that was going on. And what they found with every single test group that they were looking at is that regardless of how stringent the rules were, where everybody has an equal share or stake or whatever, that in every group, a leader formed and evolved naturally. Even if they have the title per se, that the observation was everyone would just go along eventually with one direction, one person, one idea. And it's funny because you kind of said that leadership can take different shapes. And that's what this found, right? It wasn't always just the person. Is sometimes that people were led by an idea, and that formed its own kind of framing around which people were, again, then led by. You have a lot of work with female leaders. You kind of described that before.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that, and are there unique challenges that female leadership takes on, or what are sort of some of the nuances of being a female leader?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Women in leadership has been very important in my work. And I think one of the biggest barriers and challenges that has been researched time and time again has to do with gender bias and our ideas of leadership, but they're not always congruent with one another. Our ideas of femininity and women and how women should act don't always connect with what we think leaders and leadership should look like, which is unfortunate. And while a lot of the gender bias is not always explicit, there's a lot of implicit gender bias, known as second generation gender bias, where it's really impacted by a lot of culture, a lot of societal, a lot of maintaining the status quo, for example. And so that seems to be some of the largest issues that women often face. Things like the double bind, in that women are expected to be or behave communally in terms of being caring and nurturing. Those are feminine traits. Whereas we see leadership as being assertive and commanding and directive. And so if a woman acts in a feminine way, they are liked. But if a woman acts in a very assertive, directive, leader-like way, they might be called the B word, or they're not as liked. And so the double bind is this challenge that women face, where they're walking this tightrope where they're trying to be liked. At the same time, they're trying to be seen as competent and as a leader. But if they are too competent and act like a leader, they're not liked. But if they're liked too much, they're not seen as being competent enough to be a leader. So that's that challenge that women often face. And it really is connected to bias that we implicitly have about what leadership looks like. And mainly because most of our role models of leadership from history and from what we see out in the world are typically men. We haven't had, even in the government, there's been some strides, and there's more women in the House of Rep, in the Senate. It's still not equal. Those are the challenges we face.
Yeah, I think just in my own experience that women frequently make some of the best leaders by far in a lot of different ways because of some of the things that we talked about: empathy, their ability to listen, their capacity to innately be peacemakers frequently.
There's recent research showing that people see women as better leaders than men and scoring higher in different areas of leadership. Yet we're still not seeing an equal or equitable distribution of gender in leadership. So even with that research, that people's perspectives are starting to shift, we're still not seeing the shift in those leadership roles, leadership positions in some of the highest areas.
People are people, right? And I think as at least the Western society kind of evolved, I don't know as much about Eastern culture, obviously from just growing up in the West. But I think in Western culture over the past 50, 75 years or so, there's a lot more openness towards women in the workplace and in leadership positions in general. And I may have had some of my own ideas about what it was like to work with different people of different genders, different age groups, different what have you. But I think that, I've just come to find that, again, people are people and everyone's obviously individual and different. But I've been really surprised, I think, by how capable our female leaders have consistently been within our organization. And again, this is a narrower experience. They tend to be very detail-oriented, great at handling tasks, multitasking. And these are sort of things that we sort of generalize anyways with, the difference between men and women, right? And again, it's not always true. It's certainly not true person to person, but I've always been amazed at how consistent our female leaders have been in a lot of those areas. It's always been a really positive one for us. And I know that there are challenges that women face that maybe men don't. And I think it's something that men, and I'm speaking as one of them, just aren't really that cognizant of always.
You don't experience it, so it's not always at top of mind.
Dr. Tan, thank you so much for being here on Educate Everyone.
I have a website. It's SherylleTan.com. Sherylle, SHERYLLE, Tan, TAN.com. So you could find some information on me, my publications, and the work that I do there. And it's been great chatting with you. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for being here.
And now the Middle Tree Minute.
This is Kristen Hernandez, Middle Tree's executive assistant. Mistakes aren't failures. They're stepping stones for your future success. Start a mistake of the day tradition. Ask your student, what mistake did you make today? And what did you learn from it? It teaches resilience, reframes failure, and creates a safe space for growth. Plus, if you share your own mistakes too, you model that learning never stops, even for adults. And that's the Middle Tree Minute.
And now a quick look into Dr. Atman's book, A Philosophical War. Joe, we started talking about the type of consciousness that human beings have and why we have the type that we do. So how did we come up with this type of consciousness in the first place?
Well, the short answer is we really don't know. And it's not something that we actually really think about. We're so embedded within consciousness, right? Everything that we do is within consciousness. Every action that we take, everything that we observe, it's all a part of this grand play. Consciousness is so imbued and embedded within us that it's something we really just take for granted. And we don't take much time to think about how we came to have the kind of consciousness that we do. And when we're talking about consciousness, I think it's important to make the distinction that our consciousness is different than medically or biologically when we're talking about our brains or certain things within us biologically that allow us to have consciousness. So I think it's important to make that distinction because the biological capacity that we have for consciousness is different than the brand of consciousness or the consciousness that comes out of the capacity that we have to be conscious. So I think that that's an important distinction. And what this whole project is really about is talking about how we came, as you mentioned, to have the kind of consciousness that we do. And so to kind of put it in modern terms, I think if we logged into a computer and we opened up a certain browser, we're going to interact with the internet in a particular way, depending on whether we use, Chrome or Safari or whatever the case might be, because we're accessing observable information and things that are kind of quote unquote out there through a very particular vehicle. I mean, you could say this about anything. You could get into, speaking of a vehicle, quite literally, you can access the road, you can drive on the street, but the experience is going to be very different based on the kind of vehicle that you're in. If you're in a truck, you're going to feel the road one way. You're going to see things from a different vantage point. And if you're in a Lamborghini, you're going to have a totally different experience with that same road. So we've done something similar with the ways in which we've set up our own consciousness and the way that we observe phenomena and interact with it. So that's the point of this project, is to understand first that we've made these choices and that we have these interactions that are set up in very particular ways, and yet we don't really recognize it and we don't really think about it. And so the first point of this is to get us to think about the ways in which we have, again, set up our consciousness to be what it is.
Thank you for listening to Educate Everyone with Dr. Joseph Atman and Tammy Trujillo. Join us each week as we explore the inner workings of our own minds and the educational system which builds and supports it. Also, check out our website at middletree.org to see what opportunities Middletree's programs can offer you or your student. And join us on social media. If you have any questions you'd like Dr. Atman to answer, please leave them on a post or send us a message, and you may hear them answered on the next episode of Educate Everyone. Until then, thanks for tuning in.